Good morning. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets today as soon as the media allows us to see the witnesses. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets today to receive testimony on the U.S. strategy to counter the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL. I'm grateful to our distinguished witnesses for appearing before us today. The risk posed by ISIL must be seen in the context of what many of America's most accomplished leaders and foreign policy experts have described as the most complex and uncertain international environment since the end of World War II. All across the globe, America's interests in security and stability are at risk. As part of a broader strategy to dominate Eastern Europe, Vladimir Putin's Russia continues its onslaught in Ukraine, with Russian troops and equipment leading an asymmetric campaign to undermine Ukraine's government and independence, as the United States has refused the Ukrainians weapons for its defense. China's destabilizing behavior also poses a growing challenge to U.S. national interest. Its reclamation and militarization of vast land features in the South China Sea, its continued military build-up, and of course, its blatant and undeterred cyber attacks against the United States. Iran is expanding its malign activities and hegemonic ambitions across the Middle East, as we see clearly in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, and elsewhere, and yet some in the administration seem to operate under the delusion that a nuclear agreement could lead to a new modus vivendi with the Islamic Republic. And in Syria, Bashar Assad's slaughter of his own people, which has been the single greatest contributor to the rise and continued success of ISIL, goes on and on and on, aided by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. For 4 years, the president has said Assad must go as a part of a political transition in Syria, but conditions on the ground have never allowed it. Tragically, that remains true today. What each of these growing threats has in common is a failure of deterrence brought on by a dangerous perception of American weakness and lack of resolve, which our adversaries have taken as a provocative invitation for hostility. When it comes to ISIL, President Obama's comments yesterday at the Pentagon reveal the disturbing degree of self-delusion that characterizes the administration's thinking. It is right, but ultimately irrelevant, to point out, as the president did, that we have conducted thousands of airstrikes, taken out many ISIL fighters and much equipment, and pushed it out of some territory. None of the so-called progress that the president cited suggests that we are on a path to success. Since U.S. and coalition airstrikes began last year, ISIL has continued to enjoy battlefield successes, including taking Ramadi and other key terrain in Iraq, holding over half the territory in Syria and controlling every border post between Iraq and Syria. Moreover, the longer ISIL remains undefeated in Iraq and Syria, the more potent its message is to those around the world who may be radicalized and inspired to join the group and spread violence and mayhem on its behalf. It's not that we're doing nothing. It's that there is no compelling reason to believe that anything we are doing currently will be sufficient to achieve the president's long-stated goal of degrading and ultimately destroying ISIL, either in the short term or the long term. Our means and our current level of effort are not aligned with our ends. That suggests we are not winning, and when you're not winning in war, you are losing. The reality today is that ISIL continues to gain territory in Iraq and Syria while expanding its influence and presence across the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia. There is no responsible ground force in either Iraq or Syria that is both willing and able to take territory away from ISIL and hold it. And none of our current training efforts of moderate Syrian, Sunni tribes, or Iraqi security forces are as yet capable of producing such a ground force. It is unclear why the latest gradual escalation of effort, the deployment of a few hundred additional advisors to Anbar, will make the difference that our previous efforts failed to achieve. While our coalition may own the skies, as the president said yesterday, our air campaign against ISIL continues to be limited significantly by overly restrictive rules of engagement and a lack of ground intelligence, which only gets worse as ISIL moves into urban areas to avoid coalition bombing. Any pilot will tell you that they're only as good as the targets they receive, and when 3/4 of our air missions against ISIL still return to base without dropping weapons, that is indicative of a fundamental problem with our air campaign. What's worse, none of our efforts against ISIL in Iraq can succeed while the conflict in Syria continues, and with it the conditions for ISIL's continued growth, recruitment, and radicalization of Muslims around the world. As published media reports indicate, our Syria Train and Equip program is anemic and struggling because our stated goal does not include going after Assad and his regime forces, and we still do not provide the forces we're training with the enabling capabilities to succeed in any engagement they may face inside Syria. Given the poor numbers of recruited and trained Syrian fighters thus far, I am doubtful we can achieve our goal of training a few thousand this year. But even if the program achieves its goal, it is doubtful it will make a strategic difference on the battlefield. Yes, we need a political solution in Syria, but no such solution is possible with Bashar Assad still in power. Unless and until the United States leads a coalition effort to put far greater battlefield pressure on Assad, a political solution will never be within reach, the conflict will grind on, and ISIL will thrive. The lack of a coherent strategy has resulted in the spread of ISIL around the world, to Libya, Egypt, Nigeria, and even to Afghanistan, where I visited last weekend. Afghanistan is certainly not Iraq, but the parallels are eerily familiar. As in Iraq, the United States is contemplating a drastic reduction in force presence that places at risk the hard-won gains of the last decade. While Afghanistan's security forces are improving in quality, they're still missing the same set of key capabilities the Iraqis were missing when the U.S. withdrew in 2011, including intelligence, aviation, special operations, and logistic capabilities. At the current pace, our military commanders know these capabilities will remain critically undeveloped at the end of 2016, when President Obama has announced that U.S. and coalition forces will dramatically downsize to a presence solely in Kabul. We have seen this movie before, and if we make the same mistakes, we should expect similarly tragic results. I do not want to attend another hearing like this with your successors trying to figure out a strategy to clean up after avoidable mistakes. What that means is that the President must provide our commanders on the ground with necessary forces, capabilities, and the authorities to help our Afghan partners in continuing to secure their country and defeat our terrorist enemies together. ISIL is not 10 feet tall. It can be and must be defeated. But that will never happen if we continue to delude ourselves about our current campaign. The President is fond of the truism that there is no military solution to ISIL or any other problem. What he has so often failed to realize is that there is sometimes a major military dimension to achieving a political solution. This was the critical lesson that the United States learned in the Iraq surge, and we must learn again. Security on the ground is a precondition to political reconciliation, not the other way around. The unfortunate irony is that a president elected in opposition to the war in Iraq is repeating some of its worst strategic mistakes. And what's worse, despite obvious indication that the current strategy against ISIL is failing, he has yet to find the courage of his predecessor to admit mistakes and choose a new direction. This needs to happen sooner rather than later, or the disaster the next president will inherit in the Middle East, but also far beyond it, will be overwhelming. It is clear we are living in a time of unprecedented turmoil. We see it on our television screens every day. ISIL spread across the Middle East, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and China's maritime expansion in Asia. Once again, I thank our witnesses and look forward to their testimony. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Secretary Carter, General Dempsey. Thank you. This morning's hearing is an important opportunity for this committee to hear from the administration regarding its strategy to counter the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL. It follows up on the committee's hearings in May, which outside witnesses regarding the counter-ISIL strategy. ISIL, with its violent extremist ideology and brutal military capabilities, poses a clear threat to the stability of the Middle East, Africa, and beyond, and a threat to the United States and our partners' interests in those regions and indeed even in the homeland. ISIL's campaign to establish a caliphate threatens to create a breeding ground for training extremist fighters, attracting foreign fighters intent on returning to Western countries to carry out attacks, and inspiring others in the United States and elsewhere to commit violence. The American people recognize the threat posed by ISIL, but at the same time are appropriately wary, after nearly a decade and a half of U.S. military involvement overseas, about being drawn deeper into a seemingly intractable Middle East conflict. As part of the administration's whole-of-government strategy, the Department of Defense has the lead for 2 of the 9 lines of effort against ISIL and plays a supporting role for the efforts of a number of other departments and agencies. This committee has provided essential resources to the department to implement the strategy through funding of the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund, including the President's request for both the Iraq and Syria Train and Equip Funds and $1 billion for the Counterterrorism Partnership Fund. However, the severe cuts mandated by sequestration puts at risk the ability of the civilian departments of our government, including the State Department, the U.S. Agency for International Aid, Development, and the Department of Homeland Security and Treasury Department to carry out fully the other 7 lines of effort that comprise our counter-ISIL strategy. The effect of sequestration could be that the U.S. government is having to fight ISIL literally with one hand tied behind its back. The success of the strategy depends on getting both our military and civilian departments the necessary resources to confront ISIL. At this committee's hearing in May, several witnesses called for expanding the U.S. military involvement in Iraq and Syria in response to ISIL's seizure of the Anbar provincial capital of Ramadi and ISIL's gains in Syria. The President's announcement last month of an additional 450 U.S. troops to be deployed to Iraq to train and assist Iraqi security forces begins to address the critical need to bring local Sunni tribes into the fight against ISIL. We will be interested in hearing from our witnesses what additional steps they would recommend for expanding the presence of Sunni fighters in the Iraqi security forces and to ensure that Kurdish Peshmergas receive expeditiously the weapons they need to counter ISIL in the fight. In many respects, the current challenges in Iraq result from 2 intersecting forces: the rise of ISIL and the deterioration of the Iraqi security forces and complementary governmental capacities. Many of the factors and personalities forming ISIL can be traced to the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Planning for that war failed to account for deep-seated sectarian divisions between Sunni and Shia within the region, which gave rise to grievances that fueled the rise of ISIL. In addition, many of the factors contributing to the deterioration of Iraq's security forces can be traced to the actions of Prime Minister Maliki, in particular his replacement of competent leaders in the military with cronies loyal to himself. Iran's role in Iraq and the broader region must never be forgotten either. Many of the aforementioned actions by Maliki were at the behest of Iran, or certainly with their acquiescence. And Iran's influence on Iraq's political decision-making can be seen even prior to the 2008 visit of the Iranian President Ahmadinejad to Baghdad. Today, Iran has its own military boots on the ground in both Iraq and Syria, and it continues to support its proxies. We must keep a close eye on Iran and assess carefully their interests at the tactical and strategic level. As we work with the coalition to counter the threat of ISIL, it will be useful to obtain your perspective on these and other factors as we endeavor to reshape our policies and our strategy. Ultimately, though, one of the key lessons from the Iraq War is that no amount of U.S. or coalition military assistance or boots on the ground will lead to the lasting defeat of violent extremism if the underlying political causes that allow such extremism to arise and thrive are not addressed. In Iraq, the Abadi government must continue to take substantive steps to govern in a more inclusive manner, address longstanding grievances of Iraq's sectarian and ethnic minorities, expand the integration of Sunnis and Kurds into Iraq's military and political structures, and disarm Iranian-backed Shia militias. In Syria, moderate and extreme elements of the opposition have made tactical gains against ISIL and the regime, but ISIL remains the dominant force in western Syria. Absent a moderate opposition that is willing to and capable of taking territory from ISIL and holding it, any change in the status quo is unlikely. Boasted by critical outside assistance, the Assad regime remains in the seat of power in Damascus, but has ceded territory in recent months. Despite these territorial shifts in the ground battle in Syria, a defeat on the battlefield is not the most likely end to the battle in Syria. A political solution that addresses grievances in a broad range of constituencies in Syria is the only pathway to a sustainable solution. When I met with military and political leaders in Iraq earlier this year, they emphasized that U.S. and coalition forces are at the beginning of a multi-year campaign against ISIL. They stressed the need for strategic patience. I hope our witnesses today will provide their perspectives on just where we are in the long fight and what to expect in the coming months and years ahead, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I welcome the witnesses. Secretary Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Reed, members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you to address your questions and concerns about this campaign. And I want to especially thank the chairman for going to Afghanistan over his 4th of July weekend, which I appreciate. Visiting the troops means a lot to us, sir. And as all of you know from your travels around the world, there's a high demand everywhere in the world for American leadership. From Asia, where I saw some of you in May, to Europe, where I was 2 weeks ago. The Obama administration and the members of this committee have helped ensure that we meet that demand, and I thank you for that. Same is true in the Middle East, where we're standing by our friends like Israel, working to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon and otherwise exercising malign influence, and confronting ISIL, which is the subject of this hearing. It was also the subject of a meeting yesterday at the Pentagon where President Obama and Chairman Dempsey and I discussed our counter-ISIL campaign with senior defense and interagency leaders. We all agreed that ISIL represents a grave threat and that it must be and will be dealt a lasting defeat. That's our objective, which is shared by a global coalition that reflects both the worldwide consensus on the need to counter ISIL and the practical requirement for others to do their part. The administration's strategy to achieve that objective, as the Joint Chiefs' doctrinal definition of strategy puts it, integrates all the nation's strengths and instruments of power, as has been noted. And it's executed through 9 synchronized lines of effort. The first, and arguably the most critical line of effort, is the political one, as has also been noted, which is led by the State Department. This line involves building more effective, inclusive, and multi-sectarian governance in Iraq. At the same time, the United States continues to work diplomatically to bring about a political transition from Bashar al-Assad to a more inclusive government with which we can also work to defeat ISIL. The next 2 lines of effort are interconnected: to deny ISIL safe haven and to build partner capacity in Iraq and Syria. Both are led by the Department of Defense, which alongside coalition partners is conducting an air campaign, advising and assisting Iraqi security forces on the ground, and training and equipping vetted local forces in Iraq and for Syria. Before I go on, let me say that these first 3 political and military lines of effort have to be in sync, a point that's been made already. That's a challenge, but one we're working through with our partners in the coalition on the ground and around our government. The 4th line of effort is enhancing intelligence collection on ISIL, which is led by the National Counterterrorism Center. The 5th line of effort, disrupting ISIL's finances, is co-led by Treasury and State. Lines of effort 6 and 7, both co-led by State and the National Counterterrorism Center, are to counter ISIL's messaging and disrupt the flow of foreign fighters to and from ISIL, both of which are critical in today's connected and networked world. The 8th line of effort, providing humanitarian support to those affected by the conflicts in Iraq and Syria, is led by State and AID. Finally, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the Department of Justice work together to protect the homeland, the ninth line of effort, by disrupting terrorist threats. In addition to our full-spectrum cooperative relationship with the Department of Homeland Security and other law enforcement agencies, DoD personnel continue to strike ISIL elements in Iraq and Syria. The effective execution of all 9 lines of effort by the United States and its coalition partners is necessary to ensure ISIL's lasting defeat. I want to add briefly that there are important classified dimensions to our approach to ISIL and to the Middle East more broadly, Mr. Chairman, that we won't be able to discuss in this meeting, but can discuss separately. Let me turn to the execution of the 2 lines of effort on which DoD leads, which our personnel have been performing with the excellence we all expect of the finest fighting force the world has ever known. American service members and their coalition partners have conducted over 5,000 airstrikes. That air campaign has produced some clear tactical results, limiting ISIL's freedom of movement, constraining its ability to reinforce its fighters, and degrading its command and control. Coalition air support has also enabled gains by local forces in Iraq and Syria, including Syrian Kurdish and Arab forces who recently took the key border town of Tal Abyad from ISIL, cut off one of its key lines of communication and supply, and put ISIL on the defensive and its stronghold Raqqa under pressure. Those examples demonstrate again that where we have a credible ground force working in a coordinated way with the coalition air campaign, ISIL has suffered. That's what makes the 3rd line of effort, developing the capacity and capabilities of local forces, so important. Indeed, we know from recent experience that success against ISIL requires capable local ground forces. And we know from our history in the region that putting U.S. combat troops on the ground as a substitute for local forces will not produce enduring results. That's why we're bolstering Iraq's security forces and building moderate, vetted Syrian opposition forces. But both of these efforts need strengthening. In Iraq, the Iraqi security forces were severely degraded after 4 divisions dissolved and Mosul fell a year ago this June. Our efforts to build partner capacity and advise and assist ongoing operations involve around 3,550 American personnel at 6 locations around the country. Their training work has been slowed, however, by a lack of trainees. As of June 30th, we've only received enough trainees to be able to train about 8,800 Iraqi Army soldiers and Peshmerga forces, in addition to some 2,000 CTS personnel. Another 4,000 soldiers, including 600 CTS personnel, are in training. I've told Iraqi leaders that while the United States is open to supporting Iraq more than we already are, we must also see greater commitment from all parts of the Iraqi government. We're also in the early stages of our train and equip mission in Syria. 3 months into our program, training is underway, and we are working to screen and vet almost 7,000 volunteers to ensure that they are committed to fighting ISIL, pass a counterintelligence screening, and meet standards prescribed by U.S. law regarding the law of armed conflict and necessitated by operations. As of July 3rd, we are currently training about 60 fighters. This number is much smaller than we'd hoped for at this point, partly because of the vetting standards I just described. But we know this program is essential. We need a partner on the ground in Syria to assure ISIL's lasting defeat. And as training progresses, we're learning more about the opposition groups and building important relationships, which increases our ability to attract recruits and provides valuable intelligence for counter-ISIL operations. We're also working to equip vetted local forces. In Iraq, after earlier delays, we're expediting delivery of essential equipment and materiel to the Iraqi security forces and working with the government of Iraq to ensure this equipment is quickly passed to Kurdish Peshmerga and Sunni tribal forces. In Syria, we'll begin equipping forces as soon as they complete training. We're constantly assessing this approach. We did so after the fall of Ramadi, continued through yesterday with President Obama at the Pentagon. The strategy is the right one, but its execution can and will be strengthened, especially on the ground. In Iraq, we're focused on increasing participation in and throughput of our training facilities. An example of this is our effort at Taqadum, which has been noted, in Anbar Province, where we recently deployed approximately 350 of the additional 450 American personnel authorized. We assessed our presence at this military base would provide access to thousands of previously unreachable Sunni tribesmen. This is in support of the Iraqi government's own initiative to increase outreach to the Anbar tribes. As of mid-June, the Iraqi government has enrolled and armed an initial group of 800 Sunni fighters at Taqadum, and we're supporting the Iraqi training of 500 additional fighters now at Taqadum. The Iraqis have already identified 500 more trainees that will follow the current group, and will continue to work to ensure that these Sunni fighters, which are critical of the success of our campaign, have the training and equipment needed to effectively fight ISIL. I should also note that the Anbar Operations Center is located at Taqadum, which is another reason for that particular geography, so that we can advise and assist the Iraqi commanders there commanding Sunni forces. In Syria, we seek to capitalize on the recent successes in Kobani, Tal Abyad, and continue to strike ISIL's nerve center in Raqqa. At the same time, we're looking for ways to streamline our train and equip program's vetting process, which I noted earlier, to get more recruits into the training pipeline. We're also refining our curriculum, expanding our outreach to the moderate opposition, and incorporating lessons learned from the first training class. I'm happy to speak about that more. In conclusion, I sought to describe to you clearly the strategy, the Department of Defense's execution of its critical lines of effort, and where our execution can and will and must be strengthened. Achieving ISIL's lasting defeat will require continued commitment, steady leadership from the United States and our global coalition, hard work by our men and women in uniform, essential complementarity and synchronized efforts along the other 7 lines of effort, and most importantly, commitment and sacrifice by Iraqis and Syrians. Together, and with your continuing support for the men and women of the Department of Defense, for which we are ever grateful, we will achieve ISIL's lasting defeat. Thank you.
General Dempsey.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member Reed, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come back and to chat with you today about the military component of our strategy against ISIL. Our starting point has to be the strategic picture in context. I've said before that the global security environment is as uncertain as I've ever seen it. The world is rapidly changing everywhere, and we're seeing significant shifts in an already complex strategic landscape. ISIL is one of many concerns. As the chairman mentioned, we're contending with Russia's revanchism in Eastern Europe, China's assertiveness in the South China Sea, Iran's malign activities in the Middle East, technical advancements by North Korea, rising aggression of non-state networks, and a rapidly leveling playing field in cyber and in space. While our potential adversaries grow stronger, many of our allies are becoming increasingly dependent on the United States and on our assistance, and some of our comparative military advantages have begun to erode. What makes this uniquely complicated is that these trends are manifesting themselves simultaneously. Within the Middle East, I characterize 3 converging sets of complexity. First, several governments are struggling for political legitimacy because they're not sufficiently pluralistic or they're not sufficiently accountable to their citizens. Second, the centuries-old Sunni-Shia struggle is very evident. Weak states are less able to assert independence amid the tug-of-war between sectarian regional powers. And third, we're seeing rising competition between moderate and radical elements of Islam, and ISIL and others are taking advantage of that competition. Within this evolving global context, the role the United States military is taking against the trans-regional threat of ISIL is appropriately matched to the complexity of the environment and is at a level of effort that is sustainable over time. Military power alone, as we've said, will not solve ISIL. I don't think anyone here would disagree with that. All 9 lines of effort need to be considered in the aggregate. This campaign focuses on actively reinforcing and hardening our partners in the region who must, and in most cases are, taking responsibility for their own security. And that's an important point. Enduring stability cannot be imposed in the Middle East from the outside in. The fight is enabled by the coalition, but it must be owned by those regional stakeholders. It bears repeating that this is the beginning of a complex, nonlinear campaign that will require a sustained effort over an extended period of time. We have to be just as agile as the network of terrorists we face. We are constantly evaluating our approach and making sure we're resourcing it appropriately, balanced with our other global commitments. But 4 years and counting of budget uncertainty have made this balance distinctly harder. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, General. Ms. Secretary, let me clear up a couple of points before we get into the strategy. You've stated before you would recommend a veto of the NDAA to the President. Is that your position?
He stated restated his position yesterday, and I support it. I'm happy to give the reasons for that, if you'd like, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, but you might answer also in your answer. Do you choose between fully funding the President's defense budget request with OCO funding or funding defense at sequestration levels?
Well, well, the short answer is I'm hoping we can do better than that, my view hasn't changed since I came up here a few months ago on this issue, and the chairman alluded to the problem. I very much hope that a way will be found to come together and get beyond the gridlock that we have, and to give us a normal budget process that provides a stable runway for the department. And I'll explain why that is so important. We've been going 1 year at a time budgetarily now for several years straight, and it's extremely disruptive to the operations of the department. It is managerially inefficient because we're in this herky-jerky process. It is difficult to have a multi-year national defense strategy, which we must have, with 1 year at a time perspective. It's difficult to run large programs, shipbuilding programs, aircraft programs efficiently in a 1 year at a time budget. I also believe, Mr. Chairman, that our people deserve better. That is, they need a horizon in front of them. Our military people and their families. And last, I travel around the world, as you all do, and it's embarrassing that we cannot, in successive years now, pull ourselves together before an overall budget approach that allows us to do what we need to do, which is we program in a multi-year manner. Not in a 1 year at a time manner. So for all those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I just appeal. It's not something that I have any particular expertise in, and it's obviously much bigger than defense because, as noted, the success of this campaign and the success of our national security hinges importantly, very importantly, on this department, the department that I lead, but also on law enforcement and homeland security and diplomacy. So I'm hoping, Mr. Chairman, that we can do better than that choice, and that we don't continue down what I've called a road to nowhere.
Well, you may be presented with that choice, and I would also add this is an authorizing bill. The Appropriations Committee is where the money is, but just very quickly, your confirmation hearing, you stated in response to my question about whether we should arm the Ukrainians, quote, I very much incline in that direction, Mr. Chairman, because I think we need to support the Ukrainians and defend themselves. The nature of those arms I can't say right now. I haven't confirmed with our military, but I incline in the direction of providing with arms, including to get to what your question is, lethal arms. You still have that position?
I have not changed my thinking in those months, and I had the occasion to talk to the Ukrainian Minister of Defense just the other week and
Fine,
talked to
I'm
him
just
about the
asking
kind of
whether
military
you're still
support.
you still want to support them, arming them or not. That's a pretty straightforward question.
We're considering that. We have not made a decision in that regard.
you still-
And we are providing.
Are you still inclined to provide arms to Ukrainians?
Yeah,
Please,
not-
Mr. Secretary.
Yes, I haven't changed my view.
Thank you. That was it. That was a simple answer to a simple question.
But if I
Thank you.
if I can just,
No, because I've only got 2 minutes
all right.
left. Thank you. Now we are, 5,000 airstrikes have been conducted. 75% of the airstrikes return without having dropped a weapon. If there's ever a compelling argument for forward air controllers, it seems to me that's the case. Now, you mentioned we are currently training about 60 fighters. I got to tell you, after 4 years, Mr. Secretary, that's not a very impressive number. And is it true that with these people that you are training and equipping to fight in Syria, is it true that you are telling them they're only there to fight ISIS and not Bashar Assad? Is that true?
yes, we are telling them to, that we are arming and training them in the first instance to go after ISIL and not the Assad regime. That's our priority. And these are people who are inclined in that direction and come from areas that have been overrun by ISIL.
So in other words,
motivation.
if they are barrel bombed by Bashar Assad, they are not.
No, I think we have some obligation to them once they're inserted in the field. Again, we don't expect them to be.
Is that to defend them against barrel bombing?
Well, that decision will be made when we introduce fighters into the field.
That's a small comfort to those people you're recruiting right now, that decision will be made later on. Is that fair to these young men to say, we are sending you in to fight ISIS only, and by the way, we will decide on the policy whether to defend you if you are barrel bombed?
They know that we will provide support to them. Exactly what kind of support.
Does that mean you will
under
defend them
what
against Bashar
circumstances?
Assad's barrel bombing? Mr. Secretary, this is not a very pleasant exchange. I'd like to have answers to questions. Will we tell them that we will defend them against Bashar Assad's barrel bombing?
I think we will have an obligation to help them.
Will we
when
tell
put
them that?
We have not told them that
Not
yet.
told them that. So you're recruiting people and not telling them that they're going to defend them because you haven't made the decision yet, and yet you want to train them quickly and send them in. Now, there is success on the part of an outfit called the Army of Conquest, which is funded and trained and equipped generally, mostly by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and perhaps others. They are succeeding, and they have, if there's battlefield gains, they are achieving them. Does the United States have any relationship with that outfit? Because they are fighting against Bashar Assad as well as ISIS.
I will have to get back to you on the answer to that question because who has that contact is something that we'd have to discuss separately, Mr. Chairman. Can I go back?
Go ahead.
Can I go back, Mr. Chairman? You mentioned the question of air sorties and which fraction of them result in strikes, and I'd like to explain those numbers to you a bit. In the case where the airstrikes are mounted, and I'll ask the chairman to elaborate further on this, in the case where the airstrikes are conducted in a deliberate manner, that is, one knows at the time the aircraft embarks on the sortie what the target will be, in those cases 93% of the time they're concluding the sortie. When it comes to dynamic targeting, the fraction is much lower. It's about 37%. And the reason for that is that in the case of dynamic targeting, by its nature, the aircraft is deployed with the expectation that a target of opportunity, let's say something that's moving on the ground or a developing tactical situation, will provide the opportunity for a strike. That doesn't happen all the time. But it does happen about 37% of the time, a fraction, I should note, that is much higher than it was in Afghanistan, where we did the same thing. We routinely flew sorties in order to capitalize upon fleeting opportunities or developing opportunities. So our experience here is, in fact, better than it is in Afghanistan. But anyway, that is what explains
Any
the
experienced pilot will tell you that if you have a forward air controller on the ground to identify those targets, then the number of targets hit is dramatically increased. And we have no forward air controllers on the ground, and that, I can tell you, is incredibly frustrating to the young pilots who are flying these 6.5-hour sorties, who feel that they are not achieving anything. Mr. Secretary, you might want to talk to them as well, since they're the ones that are doing the fighting.
If I can address the question of JTACs, I think that's a fundamental one, and Chairman, and since you've raised it, let me go back to the fundamentals of the strategy, which are to support capable and motivated ground forces when we find them. And we are supporting such capable and effective ground forces. For example, just to give one example, the Kurds in northern Syria now.
Mr. Secretary, my time is way up, but that has nothing to do with not having forward air controllers on the ground. I hate to cut you short, but we're 3 minutes over.
I'm just saying we don't rule that out, and our strategy doesn't.
You never rule it out. It hasn't happened. Mr. Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I was struck by your statement and said that the first and arguably most critical line with our efforts is the political one led by the State Department. And in your colloquy with the chairman, you pointed out that there are challenges with respect to a year-to-year OCO funding that's being proposed, but the state doesn't even have option to that source of funding. So are you concerned that they might be so resource deprived under the Budget Control Act that they could not be the primary?
I am. The State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, other agencies that are critical to protecting us against ISIL and other threats, they need resources too. And so that's another reason why I appeal for an overall budget perspective, and I realize it involves lots of moving parts and would require a major coming together to release the gridlock of the last few years, but I really appeal for that, not just for my own department, but for the rest of the national security establishment. I think it's critical.
Shifting to the training effort in Iraq, one of the first issues was the composition of the provisional forces that rallied a year ago to try to defend Baghdad. It's overwhelming Shia. And now we're beginning to see Sunnis appear. First, is that the deliberate cooperation of the government in Baghdad, finally getting the message that they have to have the support of the Sunni community? And second, are you beginning to see a trend that is a positive one in the sense of the overall participation of Sunnis?
We see the commitment of Prime Minister Abadi, so different from the behavior of his predecessor, to engage in a multi-sectarian way in the fight against ISIL. That includes the Kurds and it includes Sunnis. Now, that's gone slowly, which explains why the numbers are small. We expect them to grow. We hope they grow. But what we need from the Iraqi government is the enrollment of Sunnis in the Iraqi security forces and the commitment of the Iraqi government to pay them, to equip them with our help, which we provide, and then to get back to the chairman's question about direct support to them, when we have effective ground forces under the control of the Iraqi government, we are prepared to do more to support them. But we need to have those effective ground forces because local forces on the ground, we know from experience, is the only way to create a lasting defeat of ISIL, and that's what the strategy is all about.
General Dempsey, can you comment on your perception of the situation in terms of Sunni forces in Anbar province particularly, and the government in Baghdad's relationship with them, expediting weapons, providing support more than rhetorically, but actually?
Ken, Senator, thanks. as the Secretary mentioned, the good intentions of Prime Minister Abadi have not always been met with activity at echelons or levels of bureaucracy beneath him. And so there was a period of time when, frankly, we had the capability to bring them in, but we couldn't generate the recruits. That situation has improved, I think, probably as a result of their failure in Ramadi. And what we see now is a renewed effort by the Prime Minister to empower his ISF, his Iraqi security force leaders, to reach out to the Sunni tribes and to arm them. It's our policy to do that through the central government, not directly, because our objective is a unified Iraq. If it became clear that that wasn't going to happen, we'd have to reconsider the campaign.
One of the observations is the leadership at the tactical level, all the way up to brigade and division of the Iraqi security forces, continually seems to be unimpressive. Is there active changes going on right now to ensure that the leadership at the brigade, division level is competent? In fact, it is startling because it appears that ISIL, in fact, there is some indication there are former Ba'athist officers operating with them, are much more operationally and tactically capable than the Iraqi security forces. Your comments?
I do, sir. We tend to look at the tactical shifting and who owns how much territory and how many airstrikes, for example, but we also need to watch Iraqi leadership changes. Recently, that we received an open source report that their chief of defense would be retired. We consider that to be a very positive thing. There's issues up and down the chain of command. We also watch carefully the distribution of their budget, how much money is going into the Ministry of Defense, how much is going into the Popular Mobilization Force, how oil is being generated and the revenue shared. We watch the influence of the Ministry of Defense, whether the ISF is the dominant force for the government of Iraq or whether that dominance is shifting to the Popular Mobilization Forces, the relationship of the Iraqi army and the Iraqi police, and we watch the activities of the Shia militia. In every case, there's indications, there's positive indications, and in every case, there's indications that concern us.
Quickly, Mr. Secretary, because you have just a moment left, the issues come up about the training and equipping of forces going into Syria. I would presume, and the General might want to comment also, that part of the plan to insert these forces would be to protect them as much as possible from any type of response, to focus them on ISIL, but also to put them in places in the country where they would be much less likely to be engaged. But if they were engaged, they would not only have the right to defend themselves, but my presumption would be we would assist them from defending themselves from attack. Is that a fair estimate?
That's my feeling. That's what I said, that I think we have an obligation to do so. You're right. I don't expect that occasion to arise anytime soon. And to get to the chairman's point earlier, in the very first vetting, the thing, Mr. Chairman, that made the numbers so small, and I said the number 60, and I can look out at your faces and you had the same reaction I do, which is that that's an awfully small number. Why is that number so small, this in the first class? And the reason for that has to do with the criteria we apply, and some of this is the law, to these recruits. We do counterintelligence screening. We make sure that they, for example, aren't going to pose a green-on-blue threat to their trainers, that they don't have any history of atrocities. These are all things that are required of us, and that they're willing to engage in the campaign in a way that's compliant with the law of armed conflict. All of this is the legal, and I would say principled, I'm not arguing with it, policies of the U.S. as far as those fighters are concerned. And that's why 60 of them got out the other end of the process. Now, General Nagata, who's doing the training, I indicated he's got 7,000 more, expects that we'll do better as we get better. And that number 60, which is not impressive, will get larger over time as he learns more, to get to the chairman's earlier point about the groups that are willing to cooperate with us. But when we do get them, they will deserve our support, and we'll give our support to them. It's going to take some time, obviously, to get the numbers up to the point where they can really have an effect.
Thank you. Thank you.
I should point out, by the way, what we're talking about fighting in Syria, while these numbers are small, this particular trade and equip, I just need to point out that there are other capable ground forces fighting both the regime and ISIL, some of which we can support and do support with ISR, airstrikes and so forth. I gave the example of the Syrian Kurds. But we'd like to see more, and we're trying to get better at training them, because the number 60 is, as you all recognized, is not an impressive number.
Thank you.
Senator Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, this is a tough job you've undertaken, but as my wife reminds me when I complain, don't blame me, you asked for the job. But I'm not sure you asked for it. You were asked to take the job. But at any rate, Senator McCain's opening comment is exceedingly important. It goes to the key what we are here for. The whole purpose of this hearing is to how to confront and stop ISIS in the Levant. So we want to talk about that, not all these other strategies, General Dempsey, other threats around the world. We need a strategy on this problem. And I'm deeply disappointed. I don't see the confidence in your testimony or General Dempsey's testimony. I believe we're carrying out a strategy that the President has. And I don't believe it has sufficient respect for the use of military force necessary to be successful. I mean, I hate to be a critic about this. And this is important. Senator McCain warned in 2011 we should not pull out all our troops, and we needed to remain engaged in that country. And he's also warned you if we do it in Afghanistan, the same thing is liable to happen there, both of which would be tragedies of monumental proportions considering how much we have invested. The soldiers General Dempsey led in Iraq. So I'm worried. I'm not happy about this. I think delusion is a word that's too accurate. So I just wanted to say that here at the beginning, and I hope we'll get into more details about what you plan to do to reverse this action. And at some point, the President's going to have to change his mind, it seems to me. He cannot just function based on a campaign promise when reality is different. All right.
Would you like me to address that? It's a very fair question. Let me just go back to the issue of the strategy, and then I'll say something about Afghanistan. The strategy is for defeating ISIL on the ground in Syria and Iraq is to train and then enable local forces. That takes some time. I know it's difficult.
General Dempsey was training the Iraqi forces 8 years ago. I visited him in Iraq. That was his primary responsibility. We've been training them for nearly a decade. And that's not the problem right now. I think the problem is confidence within the Iraqi government and the Iraqi soldiers that they're going to be supported and that they're going to be victorious. And if they had that confidence, you'd get more recruits.
I agree with that. And that is what was lacking under Maliki. You're absolutely right.
Well, you just said strategy. The strategy, I believe you used the word strategy, is to support capable and motivated ground forces where we find them. Well, I think General Stewart, a few months ago, testified, the new Defense Intelligence Agency head, who was there in the Al-Anbar region and led the effort that the forces, when they turned it around in Iraq. General Dempsey, you remember that effort. And he said, when pressed, I felt that he was reluctant because it wasn't administration policy, but he acknowledged that when you have embedded soldiers, forward observers, United States forces embedded with troops moving out into combat situations, that those Iraqi troops will perform better. Do you agree with that, General Dempsey?
I agree that there are points on the battlefield where the presence of forward observers, JTACs, embedded soft forces would make them more capable.
And they would, so is our strategy now, does it remain that we will not do that?
I can tell you that I have not recommended it. Now,
Well,
whether we do it or not, I'm telling you that I haven't recommended it, Senator.
Well, if it
And I
would
can
make a
explain why
difference.
if you'd like.
Well, I would like to
Okay,
know why.
let's take the issue of air power because it seems to be the most prominent one. At a similar period in the Afghanistan conflict in 2012, the number of aircraft that returned with their ordnance because there were not targets available on the ground was 83%. It's 65% in Iraq right now. The JTACs and the Special Forces observers are not a silver bullet to the destruction of ISIL. The silver bullet is getting the Iraqis to fight.
Well, I totally agree with that. I just believe that we had a few forces, 1,000 forces in Mosul. Mosul never would have fallen. So now our policy is to try to take back this territory. What is the reluctance? What is the reluctance that use our special forces here? See, this is what bothers me. I'm not. I understand the problem in Syria, and I'm dubious about what we ought to do about Syria. I don't know. We probably should not have involved ourselves in Libya, but we are committed. We committed our nation in Iraq, General. We've been deeply committed for over a decade there. So is it now our policy that you're refusing to even allow special forces to be embedded with, say, 2 special forces with 600 Iraqi troops in a battalion? You're rejecting that idea?
What I have recommended is that if we find a unit which is led and is responsive and has an offensive mission where we can enable them or increase their likelihood of success, that I will make that recommendation. But to restore or to put embedded advisors in on a habitual basis, the environment is just not simply set to do that. And so, and by the way, it's not reluctance. We've got 1,600 pilots flying over Iraq and Syria today.
Well, why won't we?
We've got 3,500 boots on the ground doing train, advise, and assist.
So if we had a few advisors in the Iraqi battalions, you're saying that would not make a positive impact on their morale and their capabilities to actually win?
What I'm saying, Senator, is that for a brief temporal tactical gain, we should wait until we see a strategic opportunity to do that.
Well, I would think if we started having some wins, ISIS would have fewer recruits and we'd have better morale with the Iraqi recruits too, and they'd fight better. It's a chicken and the egg perhaps, but I think it's very important. And I hope you'll reevaluate that and recommend to the President we do that, because I think without that, we're not going to be effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks both of you for being here in the service to our country. I appreciate it very much. And as you can tell, this is a pretty sensitive subject, and it's a very concerning subject to all of us. As I go around the state of West Virginia, my little state, you know, it's a very hawkish state and a very patriotic state and a lot of veterans. Speak to all of them. They're confused right now. They really are of what, and you heard the frustration coming out, but basically, Iraq is not a united country. You have the Sunnis, the Shiites, and the Kurds. And I think Secretary Carter, you've said that, you know, until they have the will, and I think Secretary or General Dempsey, you all said the same thing, till Iraq has the will to fight. But which group has the will to fight to defend the other group? And that's what we're having a problem. And I think it's been said, well, if you have a group that's fighting and the Kurds want to fight, why do we still have to make them go through the Baghdad centralized government in order for them to get the weapons they need to defend themselves and be aggressive? So they're confused about that. They're confused about, in Syria, trying to spend the money to find people to train when you've acknowledged that we only had 60 of them successful right now and the amount of effort we're spending there. But yet, I think at that, you said you had the Kurds, Syrian Kurds that were fighting, and some things of that sort. I don't know. And then I'm asked the question. They said, we continue to keep trying to train and arm the Iraqis. And it seems like all they're doing is supplying the ISIL with the equipment that the Americans are giving them. And when are we ever going to stop, giving equipment to the people that won't defend it and fight for it? So I guess, are we talking, or at your level, are you talking to the White House about rethinking the whole Iraqi position as far as one centralized government, one Iraq, or maybe a separated Iraq?
I think we're all aware that it is very difficult to govern Iraq in a multi-sectarian manner. And so have we thought about all the alternatives to that? I think we all have, actually, for years, and I'm sure all of you have as well. We are trying to assist Prime Minister Abadi in governing in a different way from the way Maliki governed, which, as Senator Sessions noted, led to the disintegration of the Iraqi security forces, the sectarian coloration of them, and that's what ultimately led to their collapse in Sunni territory.
Secretary Carter, if I could ask this question also along those lines. I've been asked the question, you just reminded me. They said, didn't we see signs that Maliki was incompetent, that he would have gone strictly to a sectarian position as he did, not for a strong, united Iraq? Did we not, with all the people we've had there, did we not see that coming and could not have averted that from happening?
I can only speak for myself in that regard, and I was not closely involved in it in the time. I certainly had that concern about Mr. Maliki, and I know that many of you met with him. I met with him several times, and it was quite apparent to me. Now, Prime Minister Abadi says he has a different intention, which is to govern Iraq from the center, but in a decentralized enough way that the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shia each have enough space to carry on their own welfare in the way that they wish, but there is a single integral Iraqi state. And that is what he says he's working towards, and we're supporting him in that regard. That's why, for example, when we provide arms to the Kurds, we do it with the consent of the Iraqi government in order to indicate that we support the idea of a single Iraqi government in Baghdad, but we also want the Kurds in the fight and armed, and that has not delayed our arming of the Kurds.
It seems like the biggest problem we have is with the Sunnis and the Shiites within.
And then the Sunnis and the Shiites, and this is why it's so important to take the time to train a truly multi-sectarian Iraqi force. There are elements of the Iraqi forces that have that right character. For example, their CTS.
General.
And so our strategy, just to go to the beginning, is to train and equip those local forces. They're essential. Then we can help them. And it is a chicken and egg thing, except that you need to have the capable and motivated ground force. Then we can enable it rather than to substitute for it, which doesn't lead to a lasting result.
I would think, General Dempsey, is that it's been pointed out here that, we've spent multiple years, 10 years plus, $1 trillion, lost a lot of lives in Iraq, and we had 100,000 troops there at one time trying to train and defend and get them motivated, and that didn't work. So that's the hard question. how do you go home and answer that? How do I go home and answer that we're going to try this over again? Maybe we'll do a better job of retraining. I think that was the frustration you've seen coming out of Senator Sessions.
Well, I share it. But I think it's probably worth mentioning that my judgment about how this will evolve over time is that it's a generational issue. It is trans-regional, Senator. It is elements of it in Afghanistan. We see it in Iraq and Syria. We see it in the Sinai. We see it in Libya. And we can't just focus like a laser beam on one part of it. It has to be pressured across it. And so what we're trying to do is achieve an enduring defeat, which means we got to work it through partners, because they have more to gain and more to lose. And finally, we've got to find a sustainable level of effort, since I do believe this is a generational challenge.
Yeah, and I just think that basically my question would be overall, are we trying to defend the British lines that were drawn 100 years ago and putting people in a territory that they don't believe that's their country? I mean, why are we forcing something upon people that don't want to accept?
So I'll just follow up with you. I also share that concern, that the Mideast will never be the Mideast again.
Yeah.
And so everything that I recommend to the Secretary and to the President is recommended with the intention of being flexible enough that we can build upon it if we do find that inclusive national unity government in Iraq or not.
Thank you.
I can't help but mention the situation was stabilized after the surge, and we had won. And we predicted if everybody was pulled out that the situation would descend into chaos. It is a fact that thanks to General Petraeus and the surge and great sacrifice, Iraq war was won. And to ignore that in that conversation, Mr. General Dempsey, is to me intellectually dishonest.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ayotte.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, President George W. Bush signed an agreement with the Maliki government to withdraw all forces.
We'll have this debate
2011.
later on, but it was clear that we could have, and everybody knows they could have, and the people who were there knows they could have. Senator Ayotte.
I want to thank both of you for being here, for your service to the country. We appreciate it. I wanted to ask you, Secretary Carter, you had said in answer to Senator Manchin that, in fact, the arms that we're providing to the Kurds, we're doing so with the consent of the Iraqi central government. Does that mean we're doing it directly, or are we going still through the Iraqi central government?
Well, first of all, we're not the only ones, but we and others basically convey the weapons directly to the Kurds, but we inform the Iraqi government and get their formal consent to it. So it doesn't delay the arming of the Kurds, but we're trying to stick up for basically the central government.
Because previously we had heard complaints about it originally going through the Iraqi central government and then to the Kurds. So I'm glad to hear that we're directly providing it to the Kurds, letting the Iraqi central government know what we're providing.
Mr. Barzani was here in town. You may have met with him a few weeks ago, and he was grateful for what was being provided, and he noted that the delays, which is the principal problem that were experienced early on, are not being experienced now, either in the shipment of our equipment or that of others. For example, the Germans providing anti-tank munitions, which they value very much. But we are trying to stick up for the principle that Iraq is a single, unitary, multi-sectarian state. And difficult as that may be, that is much preferred to the alternative, which is the sectarian disintegration of Iraq.
Let me follow up. So clearly the Kurds are capable and motivated. And at this point, what are they receiving all of the weapons that they've asked for? Because as I understood it, ISIS unfortunately has captured some of the armaments that we left in Iraq, and some of them heavy armaments. The Kurds are quite effective, but it's hard if you're out-armed. And are they now receiving, what have they requested that we're not providing, and if so, why?
I'll let Chairman Dempsey answer that, but again, just to say it's not just us. I think there are more than 12 nations overall arming the Kurds, and I noted I was with the German defense minister over in Germany last week, and she was providing to the Kurds these critical anti-tank weapons of a kind the Germans make that is especially effective. So it's not just us. And the Kurds are an example of what we're looking for, which is an effective ground force that'll stick up for itself, hold together, take and hold territory, and that's why we're providing them with support.
So we agree with that. I think that there's been broad agreement on that, and so we just want to make sure that they have what they need.
Senator, I'm not aware of anything that they've asked for that we haven't provided. We probably haven't provided it in the quantity that they may have desired, MRAPs, for example. and we're working to address those quantity issues.
I wanted to follow up on a different topic, because General Dempsey, you mentioned in your testimony some of the other challenges we face around the world, including the malign influence of Iran. And recently, I read it today in the press that, in fact, Iran was actually pushing for the lifting of the arms embargo at the UN, and also the resolution that bans Iran from developing ballistic missiles. So I wanted to get both of your thoughts on those two issues and the importance of, as we look at Iran's malign influence in the region. As far as I can tell, we still see Iran not only supporting the Assad regime, Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, and also we've heard reports on the Taliban undermining our interests. So your thoughts on those two issues?
I'll start, Marty, if it's okay. You're right that I can't speak to what's going on in the negotiations. Secretary Kerry's conducting those negotiations, but I agree with your perspective, namely that we have serious concerns with Iranian malign activities outside of the nuclear issue, which is the focus of those talks. And it is in several different locations around the region. And whatever happens as far as an agreement over the nuclear program with respect to Iran is concerned, I think we, and certainly I feel this, have a clear duty in the Department of Defense, first of all, to defend our friends and allies, keep a robust posture in the Gulf, our friends and allies to include especially Israel, maintain our robust posture, and continue to maintain the military means to strike Iran's nuclear program if we were ordered to do so. We work on all three of those things, and we'll work on them whether or not an agreement is reached in Geneva.
So just to be clear, Secretary, it doesn't sound like, based on what you're saying, given their malign activities in the region, that it would be a good idea to lift the arms embargo right now on what Iran receives. Would you agree with me on that?
No, we want them to continue to be isolated as a military and limited in terms of the kind of equipment and material they're able to.
And also, can you explain to us why is it important that we also continue to stop them from having an ICBM program? Because we know we know they have one.
Yeah,
but also
that's
from the development.
The reason that we want to stop Iran from having an ICBM program is that the I in ICBM stands for intercontinental, which means having the capability to fly from Iran to the United States, and we don't want that. So that's why we oppose ICBMs. Chairman, do you want to add anything on any of those points?
Just to answer your question, because you posed it to both of us, we should, under no circumstances, should we relieve pressure on Iran relative to ballistic missile capabilities and arms trafficking.
Thank you. I also just wanted to point out something, Secretary Carter, when the chairman had asked you about the defense authorization. One thing that I think needs to be pointed out, the president has said he will veto it. The defense authorization received 71 votes in the Senate. I would describe that as very bipartisan, and so it troubles me that he would seek to veto something that received 71 votes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you. Secretary, thank you. I just got back from Iraq with Senator Kaine, who led our trip. And one of the meetings we had was with a number of the Sunni tribal leaders, and some of them were from the Haditha area. And in talking to them, they said, we have stood with you, we have faith with you, but we have people who are now eating grass in our town. We have no food, we have no supplies, and we have been told the only airlift that can come in would be on military transport. Is there anything you can do to help feed our people? And so I wanted to put that before you to see if there's something we can do to be of aid to these individuals.
Well, I'll say something about that and then ask the chairman if he wants to add. First of all, I want to thank you, Senator Donnelly, also Senator Kane, for traveling there. We appreciate it on behalf of the 3,550 members of our armed forces that are in Iraq and conducting this fight. Thank you for taking the time to go visit them this 4th of July weekend. The humanitarian situation is yet another tragic consequence of what's gone on in ISIL. It remains one of the coalition's efforts, as I indicated in my opening statement, to relieve the humanitarian situation. That's very difficult to do when there is not order and control in the ground. And so this is why we need to get a security situation that's stable, ground forces that are capable of seizing territory, holding territory, and governing. That's the only way to get the humanitarian situation turned around, either in Iraq or in Syria. It's very sad and it's tragic. And in the case of Iraq, as has been noted, something brought about by the reemergence of sectarianism in a really tragic way. Chairman, you want to add anything?
One of the reasons we went to Kadam Air Base, also locally called Habaniya, is to advise and assist in the Anbar Operations Center, which is where these kind of issues should actually migrate through. And you should be interested to know the Iraqis have the capability to address that. They have C-130J, state-of-the-art cargo.
I know they do, but they're not.
Yeah, well, we'll pass it to the guy who's embedded.
And when you're hungry, your stomach doesn't tell you want Iraqi food or U.S. food. You just want help. And one of the bonds created with these tribal leaders is they said, we've always felt we could count on you. And to follow up on that, as we look at Ramadi and other areas in the Iraqi armed forces, one of the great tragedies of this whole thing was that the number of ISIS fighters in Ramadi was extraordinarily insignificant in terms of the overall number, but the Iraqi forces headed the other way. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on making sure that the Iraqi forces know that there's no back door anymore. There's only one way through Ramadi, and that's forward.
I'll say something about that, and then, Chairman, you may want to add. The way you recount the fall of Ramadi is exactly correct. Ramadi needs to be retaken, and the way to do it is to have a force under the command and control, competent command and control of Iraqi security forces commanders, which has been a challenge, and a plan and the means to, as you say, make sure that they don't bog down and they're able to take Ramadi and move through Ramadi. This will be a test of the competence of the Iraqi security forces. And it's a test that they must pass, and therefore our and the coalition's involvement is to try to train and equip and support them to be successful. And we're going to take the time and encourage them to take the time so that the operation, when they do conduct it, is successful.
One of the side spin-offs that when it is successful and Ramadi is taken back is that ISIS will then look for a quick PR claim somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so I just want to make sure that we're ready in surrounding towns and in surrounding areas that when Ramadi falls, we know they're going to step somewhere else, and that we have a plan in place to protect those other towns as well.
The Ramadi campaign, which about a month ago was about to be executed precipitously, has actually been, with our help, is now a very deliberate campaign, first to isolate it and then to go back and recapture it with a supporting effort in Fallujah. So our presence in the Anbar Operations Center is allowing the Iraqi security forces to take a more deliberate campaign approach and to avoid the very toothpaste aspect of the way ISIL squirts around the battlefield when you squeeze it in one place and it turns up another. But this is very much us helping them understand the threat and formulate a campaign to address it so that they get credit for it and that they become credible to the people of Al-Anbar province?
Well, as I'm sure you know, the Sunni tribal leaders, they have a tremendous value for the relationship they've established over the years with the United States, established in blood and treasure. And so what gives them confidence more than anything is knowing that not that our soldiers are in the front, not that our soldiers are in the combat, but that we're there to help guide and help provide advice and help provide plan and help provide air cover is the other thing that they talked to us about. They said, you have no idea how our spirits soar when we see your air assets. And so they want to make sure that all of that is going to be in place as we move forward. Then they're willing to buy in. If not, they feel their families are exposed. One last thing I wanted to ask you, I see my time is running short, and that is in Syria, and you don't have to answer this, I'll ask second round. You know, the question comes up, so when Assad goes, if Assad goes, how does the space get filled with people who we think can be of help as opposed to Nusra or ISIS? And I know that's the tremendous challenge you have too. And it seems like we are getting further behind the curve as opposed to in front of the curve on that question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman, thank you for appearing today for your testimony. I would like to associate myself with the remarks that Chairman McCain made earlier today about arming the Ukrainian government. He and I traveled there last month to as far east as we could go to Dnipropetrovsk. We saw very brave and skilled soldiers. We saw them doing things like constructing unmanned aerial vehicles out of styrofoam to meet their needs. And in addition to the lethal aid they need, they also still need a substantial amount of non-lethal aid. Some soldiers have the improved first aid kits that our soldiers have been carrying overseas. Some soldiers have first aid kits that look like they came out of the prop scenes in MASH, in addition to radar systems and radios and so forth. But moving on to the Islamic State. One point that I don't think has been discussed here today is the Islamic State in Egypt. There have been a series of spectacular terrorist attacks in the Sinai Peninsula. The Islamic State takes credit for those attacks. We still have the multinational force and observers in the Sinai Peninsula, almost 1,800 soldiers, 1,200 of which are American personnel. Secretary Carter, General Dempsey, can you explain to us what steps we've taken to ensure that our troops in the Sinai Peninsula are adequately protected and are working with the Egyptian security forces to not just defend themselves, but try to defeat the Islamic State in the Sinai Peninsula?
Thank you. Let me address the Ukraine part first, and then the chairman can address Sinai. First of all, thank you for going to Ukraine. I've been there many times, and the government there and the people there, particularly in the western part of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's conduct there has had the opposite of whatever effect he thought it might have in terms of attracting Ukraine in the direction of Russia. He has strengthened the feeling among Ukrainians, particularly in the western part of the country, that they want to have a future that they determine and that isn't determined from outside. And to get to your point, we're constantly assessing, and this gets back to the chairman's earlier point, the kind of assistance that we provide to the Ukrainians. The principal kind of assistance, however, is, I'll come back to the military part in a moment, but I can't emphasize the importance of economic assistance to Ukraine. And that's largely in the hands of the Europeans, and so also are the sanctions against Russia. And that's really the main event. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of that. That's because that's mostly a matter for the EU rather than the United States. We are less directly involved, but we certainly support the EU, both in its sanctions against Russia, which we share, but theirs are more important because their volume of trade is greater, and also their efforts to strengthen the Ukrainian government and economy, support reform there, and the independence of Ukraine. I did talk to, as I mentioned, to the defense minister there about what he needed, and his principal focus was on training. And so, as I said, we'll constantly reassess that, but we are assessing that, and I'm open to what we do in the future. I've indicated that. I continue to indicate that. But his emphasis was on training, and we have trainers now in Yavoriv, which is the principal training range there. That's much appreciated. He was asking me and us for more of that kind of training. I think we'll continue to do that and to support the Ukrainian military. I should say that the defense minister of Ukraine used to be the interior minister, which is a very good combination because the Russian and separatist threat is a hybrid kind of threat. Hybrid in the sense that it's signified by the little green men phenomenon, a combination of the exercise of malign influence through sort of KGB-type tactics on the one hand, and battlefield operations on the other. And he's somebody who really understands that kind of hybrid warfare. Yeah. That's really where he wants our help.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I don't mean to cut you off, but I would like to go on Sinai and have other questions.
Yeah, on the MFO, about 9 months ago, anticipating and watching the intel stream about the radicalization of the Sinai and the fact that the Egyptian armed forces had moved resources to their western border. We actually did a joint staff integrated vulnerability assessment, and as a result of that, we introduced Blue Force Tracker, raid towers, changed movement techniques, enhanced their communications, put in some counter-mortar radars, things that you're very familiar with. We also have been in touch with our Egyptian Armed Forces colleagues. They've increased the number of they've brought back Egyptian Armed Forces into the Sinai. They accompany us on our movements when we make them. And of course, we recently released some of the capabilities that had been withheld from them so that they could address their terrorist threat in the Sinai.
You're confident that American personnel in the Sinai currently has adequate protection against terrorist activity there?
I'm confident that they are adequately protected today, but I fully expect that threat to increase. And in fact, I recently had a conversation with the Secretary about the future of the MFO mission, which, as you know, really hasn't changed in the last 50 years.
Thank you. I'd now like to move to the heart of the Middle East and the Islamic State. For the record, I think the Islamic State is a grave and growing threat. But until they develop their own ballistic missile program and until they have thousands of centrifuges and tons of uranium, I believe the Islamic Republic will be a graver threat than the Islamic State, that is, the Islamic Republic of Iran. My objections to the course we've taken in the nuclear negotiations are well known, and I will not repeat them here. But I will note that Iran remains an anti-American, terror-sponsoring outlaw regime that is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans from Lebanon to Iraq, Afghanistan. General Dempsey, you served 3 different tours in or associated with Iraq. How many American soldiers died at the hands of Iranian militias or explosively formed projectiles during your command?
Yeah, I recently heard both the Chief of Staff of the Army and the current CENTCOM commander put that number at about 500.
Hundreds of Americans died, and probably thousands were wounded or suspected of being wounded. What should we say to their families, the families who lost soldiers at the hands of Iranian militias or Iranian roadside bombs, once we reach a deal that's going to give Iran tens of billions of dollars in sanctions relief and international legitimacy without them changing their behavior?
I tell you what I've told them is that solving the nuclear issue diplomatically is a positive outcome, but make no mistake about it. There's at least 5 other malign activities in which Iran is engaged that cause me grave security concerns, and we won't take our eye on those 5. And you know what they are: ballistic missiles, sea-based mines, cyber activities, arms trafficking, and surrogates and proxies.
Thank you.